238. The Myth of Politics. Chalcedon Position Paper number 143, September 1991. The priority of politics as a social concern is an indication of a coming slavery and death for that society. The political order may be a democratic, republican, fascist, socialist, monarchist, or anything else, but its future becomes bleak whenever and wherever the dominating force in a society is political. A political or politicized social order is always very impressive. It concentrates on the monumental. This may mean pyramids and palaces. It can mean great civil and statist monuments, buildings, centres, and statuary, all calling attention to the greatness of the state. The monumental is the statist style in architecture and in everyday practice. As statism develops and begins to command society, its two main expressions of power are lawmaking and coercion. Taxation is basic to both, and it continues to grow as the power of the state becomes the people's faith and hope. The state's solution to problems is to pass a law. Now God, by his fiat word, can declare, "Let there be," and creation comes into existence. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 31. The state has no such power to create, but this does not restrain it in its desire to play God. Original sin is man's desire to be his own God, knowing or determining good and evil, right and wrong, and all law and morality for himself. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Man institutionalizes his original sin in many ways, but supremely in the state. He seeks thereby to create a new world order, bypassing God and issuing decrees to resolve all human problems. Because statist man bypasses God, he also bypasses success and ensures turning his society into hell on earth. The state, in revolt against or in separation from God, offers its own plan of salvation for man, cradle to grave or womb to tomb security. Politics succeeds by promises of security, which is another way of saying slavery. Political campaigns are usually waged in terms of offering the most credible increases in security and protection. The risk-free life is promised, but the people are not told that a risk-free life means slavery, and death is most risk-free. A slave's vision is of security. Slaves have repeatedly revolted throughout history, but their revolts have been simply against particular conditions of slavery. They demand security without the burdens of slavery. This is a worldwide problem today, and it will not end until men seek true freedom in Christ. Men simply turn from one candidate to another, always demanding what politics can never deliver: salvation from their problems. The myth of politics is the belief that life's problems can be solved politically. It is the worship of Caesar. Given the right political leader, the social problems will be solved and disappear. Whenever Christian faith wanes, the political myth flourishes because men need and want salvation. With the rise of the myth of politics, God's law is derided and the state's law exalted. There is a close relationship between the rise of antinomianism in the churches and the rise of statism in a society. Law is justice expressed in a body of laws. If we lose interest in God's covenant, we lose interest in his laws and look to a human covenant for law. The social contract theory of John Locke and others replaced God's covenant steadily, and the Western world moved from the rule or canon of God's laws to the canon of statist law. Man's law became sovereign because man, through the state, was now the new lord and sovereign over creation. Sir William Jones insisted that law is a science, and man's law moved him to poetry. And sovereign law, that state's collected will, o'er thrones and globes elate, sits empress, crowning good, repressing ill. Smit by her sacred frown, the fiend's discretion like a vapour sinks, and e'en the all-dazzling crown hides his faint rays, and at her bidding shrinks. Not God, but man's law is sovereign, and it is the world's collected will. Now, since man's will is fallen and depraved, any law, quote, the collected will, end quote, produces will become progressively more evil as man departs further from the triune God. Before the sovereign power of the world's collected will, according to Jones, all other forces hide and shrink. Notice, too, that the word sacred is transferred from God to the world's collected will. The Church has made itself irrelevant and peripheral to society by its antinomianism. As McKnight said with respect to this outlook, as it manifested itself in Boccaccio, the sacred does not disappear. There is still concern for salvation, but salvation seems to have little to do with everyday life. There is a grim irony in the fact that churches now would disapprove of the risque tales of Boccaccio's Decameron, while fully accepting the antinomianism he promoted in that book. Father Boccaccio now lives in most pulpits. Hans Sedelmeier wrote that sin is a cutting of oneself off from the divine life. Today, sin is limited to some areas of moral offences, when, in reality, it means separating any area of life and thoughts from God and His law order. It is a disturbance in the cosmos of man. Sedelmeier cites Theodor Hecker's words, "In sins we are all autonomous. If any area of our being or our society is separated from the law of God and from Christ our King, we are in sin, because autonomy means literally self-law, as against theonomy, God's law. We live in an age of militant autonomy in church and state. As a result, the omnipotent state has replaced God. It is no improvement if we replace the state with the omnipotent individual or the omnipotent church. The summum bonum, or highest good, was once a matter of philosophical discussion. It is a concern now forgotten in most circles. The pagan state was the highest good in antiquity, and we have returned to paganism and its myth of politics. The pagan state fought bitterly against the challenge to its priority. The state and its politically correct scholar prostitutes hounded their Christian rivals. Thus, Justin Martyr, a philosopher, on converting to Christianity and writing as a Christian, was beheaded at the instigation of a rival and pagan author, Crescens. Crescens was a cynic philosopher, close to the emperor, Aurelius. Because Justin Martyr had made a telling critique of a comment by Crescens, he paid with his life for his insight. Such incidents were common to Greece, Rome, and other pagan states. All power rested in a single order, the state, and its power was total. Power, then and now, becomes terror in action, a fact boldly asserted by Robespierre. He held that in a revolution, the driving force must be both virtue and terror. Virtue, without which terror is destructive; terror, without which virtue is impotent. But what is virtue in all this? It is simply what the state says it is: and the state can change its mind. The state's mind changes, but its coercion, uncontrolled by Christian faith, remains. Henry James Sr., a Swedenborgian, a utopian and a socialist, more than a century ago, held that the kingdom of man is at hand. He was right, but not in the happy sense he had imagined. The myth of politics has led the world into slavery, some areas more rapidly than others. Politics cannot, by its fiat laws, create a new paradise, only a growing hell on earth. But if there is no God and his law above and over every state, person, area of life and institution, then men will hold, or even declare as Napoleon did on November the 4th, 1804, "My mistress is power." Again, on August the 13th, 1805, he said, "I want to create in France a lay state," meaning a secular one. This has been the goal of the Western world and of socialists everywhere. The results have been tyranny and devastated economies. The state is not God, it cannot create, and it is a voracious consumer. As the surviving areas of freedom continue to produce, the state moves into all of them to control and govern them to death. The word of the Lord remains, "Thou shalt have none other gods before me." Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 7. The state is a false god, an idol God will smash. Will you be smashed with it? The Lord our God, he alone is God and sovereign over all.